Awesome. All right, Danny, Roddy, such a pleasure,
Liam.
sincerely. Um, so to any of you who have never heard of Danny Roddy and are just coming to this, I would, in a sentence, describe Danny as the foremost spokesperson for the bioenergetic approach to health. And you could easily put Dr. Ray Peat and his massive body of knowledge sort of as the godfather of that place in the health sphere. Do you want to add anything to that, Danny?
I usually joke and say, well, one, thank you for having me, Liam. Total pleasure. I usually say I'm the apprentice that Ray Peat never wanted as a joke, but yeah, like finding out about him, thinking that this guy has done so much, put so many pieces together where like different dietary modalities and quote gurus end quote were just starting to figure things out, like saturated fats over unsaturated, etc. That I was like, man, like just when you find something out and you're really passionate about it, like you can't help but make content or talk about it with friends or whatever. And so it's just kind of out of necessity to talk about Ray and all the aggregator he is of all those different people like Gilbert Ling, Albert St. George, Hans Selye, William F. Koch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, like I was saying, about 2 years ago, I found him and his work and your work immediately after. And it just like really struck a chord with me on such a sort of primary level that it didn't take much convincing for me to hear everything and just listen to everything, because I knew that if I didn't understand it yet, it was because I didn't understand how it played into this primary principle of bioenergetics. And that basically, if I didn't understand why milk was a good thing or a calcium to phosphorus ratio was advisable, it's because I didn't understand that in the context of the bioenergetic approach or principle first. And that kind of brings me into something I wanted to bring up with you, which is I made this video a couple of days ago or a week ago about like a hierarchy for concepts as health coaches, right? And so you were on another show a moment ago, and you were talking about tools in your toolkit. And I'm like, yes, exactly, right? There are countless tools that might be useful, but if you don't know why, you really don't know what you're doing, right? And so the tools are like occupy this sort of bottom rung in my conceptual hierarchy. They're really important, of course, because it's where the rubber meets the road. But if you as a coach don't know why the tool is doing the desirable thing and the metric for determining what is desirable, you really don't have anything to stand on, right? So in that video, I made the claim that basically if you're talking to somebody, another health coach in a field that you're engaged in, you absolutely first need to address the primary principle that's at play in the discussion, right? Because if you have a difference of opinion on the primary principle, everything else you're going to be talking about is going to be fruitless, right? It's going to be agony. And so I guess that kind of brings me into the first real question for you, which is, can you talk to how you see the bioenergetic approach as a primary principle, and specifically in relation to, I would basically ask you to make a case for putting, or maybe I have this mistaken, bioenergetics on one side and this sort of syntropy, if that's a word you're familiar with. Bioenergetics and
Nope.
syntropy is in the opposite of entropy, right? So the process of collecting order rather than collecting chaos, right? And so then you have on the other side, you have rate of living theory, right, with Raymond Pearl, and entropy. And so much of health, especially within the alternative biohacking longevity sphere, is still operating under that primary principle of inevitable entropy, decay, and rate of living, right? So have at it.
Yeah, you probably understand this better than I do. That was a major realization that like paleo and low carb, carnivore, veganism, vegetarianism. I thought they're like the undercurrent of maybe subconsciously that a lot of those ideas ascribe to Raymond Pearl's rate of living theory of like wear and tear and slow down the system, cryogenic therapy, ice baths, etc. Like especially paleo and low carb. And so I thought that like reading, I think it was Ray's 1994 Generative Energy book, and he says something like, if we could just mimic the metabolism of like a healthy 10-year-old, and I don't know how many healthy 10-year-olds are around these days, but like maybe we go back to like, I don't know, the 50s and mimic the metabolism of a healthy 10-year-old. That's like the goal of the so-called like bioenergetic point of view. And so I thought that was just liberating, you know, and again, it gives you like, when I used to be religious in my, I think it was my youth pastor. He's like, Danny, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And it kind of applies to like a view of like a concretizing a view of health. And a lot of the other views, like, again, the ones I mentioned, like the vegan, carnivore, low carb, are kind of ethereal in their endpoints. Whereas I feel like the bioenergetic approach or the anti-stress or the pro-thyroid or the repeat or whatever you want to call it is gives a person more of a direction to go with the pulse and the temperature. And then you can get more into the nitty gritty of like lab work, like the TSH, total cholesterol, the prolactin, vitamin D, parathyroid hormone. And I think with that information, like the person's symptoms, the pulse and the temperature and the lab work, that provides like a fantastic foundation for actually like moving in a positive direction, rather than just saying like, oh, I think we should eat what our ancestors ate. I'm like, okay, so I do that, and then what is supposed to happen exactly with that? Or I'm supposed to like get rid of animal products in my diet, and then what is it? My problem should just be resolved after that. And so again, I didn't necessarily know what I was searching for through doing all those different diet modalities, but when I got to Ray, and he says that weird stuff like, oh, milk is good, and then you've heard for 10 years that milk is like the worst thing ever, and he's talking about the calcium phosphorus ratio and things, you know, because I mean, if you think he's like a smart intellectual person, he probably has a reason for doing that. And then you just go down the rabbit hole with all of those different kind of health things that he talks about. So yeah.
Right. And so then, yeah, if you have a tool that's, you know, quote unquote, repeat approved, well, at least we can rationalize and provide like a legitimate explanation. Well, it's better to do this because when you can suppress parathyroid hormone, you can allow for more thyroid hormone. When you allow for more thyroid hormone, this is conducive to moving more energy through the system. Moving more energy through the system is specifically the process which promotes the addition of complexity or the stabilization of the cell, the organism, etc. Right?
Yeah, perfect. Like, and if somebody was skeptical about that, like I'd encourage them to read Hypothyroidism, the Unsuspected Illness by Broda Barnes, and like the amount of different problems that he treated with like a simple thyroid supplement is, it's like everything from depression to PMS to insomnia, like you name it, or arthritis, like you name it. And Broda Barnes treated that specific problem with thyroid hormone. And so it speaks to kind of the energetic hypothesis, just increasing the energy, like the real biological energy, like you said, complexifying the system, alleviating stress, inflammation, and those being synonymous with the whole concept of aging, I think.
Right. And then this was another thing I touched on in a prior video I made, which was like, we seem to lose sight of, in medicine, this definition of an organism, that it's self-maintaining, right? And so all of these approaches are so mechanistic and deterministic. Like you have your genes, and that's like the blueprint for how your car was made, and your body is like your car. But your car can't make more parts for itself out of gasoline, right? Whereas if you add fuel to your body, you can make no one even denies that. We're like, yeah, of course you regrow your tissues. Well, but we're like, what's the root of that process then, you know?
Yeah, no, that's like a lesser understanding of mine, but what is it called? Like the central dogma of biology, the DNA goes to the message to the RNA to the protein, and that is the kind of the nucleus as the brain of the cell. And Ray and maybe Harold Hillman and Gilbert Ling and then Dennis Noble argue that the cell is just responding to its environment, and then will I guess change its that will have an effect on the DNA and things like that. So that was like less important to me because I feel like my whole health journey was kind of characterized by these moments of like peak experience and feeling good, followed by like feeling totally awful, you know. And I knew that if I just implemented the right things, it was just about trying to maintain that peak feeling and feeling good all the time, or to steal Ray's euphoric term, like being as excited as a child on Christmas morning, I think he said. And so again, that what is guiding like kind of the development of the cell is an interesting question, but I don't think a person fully needs to go into that or understand it to try to just feel better. But again, I just doubt the veracity of the genetic determinism thing just from my own experience. For example, even I had like a DNA genetic test or something that said I would never be able to drink milk. That was total nonsense. You know, like I could drink milk after I took antibiotics. So again, I just I know that's a big thing in the health world, but I'm not sure how useful it is even to think about it.
Totally. So we can keep going and going. Moving to the next question I had written down. You know, obviously we talk about how crazy, especially Georgie does a great job talking about how crazy and ass backwards like standard of care really is, right? Traditional Western medicine. Okay. Well, sort of like there's big organic and this industrial organic food supply that also creates all kinds of problems. We have like big alt health, right? And I kind of see that as equally problematic, namely in its amorphous principles and its amorphous concepts. And I see the work that you're doing in particular as bridging that gap because we have on the one side this really digitized, atomized, reductive or reducing and reductionist science, quote unquote. And that's the only thing that bears the title of science. And then you have these other people who get like written off as hippies because all they're really saying is, oh, we're all connected, man. Like it's all energy. And then you have Ray saying, well, no, the energetic presence of a cell determines like its health and its longevity. And I think, I don't know where we would be without you. I kind of see the bioenergetic place as alt, right? We're like two steps in.
I completely agree. There were times that, so again, on my big long journey, there were times where I saw orthomolecular doctors. There were times when I saw naturopaths, and then there was another time I saw an osteopath, and those were kind of all like alt doctors, you know. And then after seeing a number of those people, I was like, this is just as bad as like normal mainstream doctors that I already didn't like, you know. They prescribe like tons of different supplements for methylation and things like that. They have this whole other alt paradigm that is equally fruitless, I think. And so again, like I would have completely written off anything to do with energy completely, you know, if it wasn't for Ray. And so I think it was just his mixture of, I've told this like 100 times, but I was always interested in that hormone prolactin. And when Ray was talking about it, I had like completely forgotten about it during my whole time on like paleo and low carb. And I had never heard like really naturopaths or anybody talk about it. And then Ray was writing like extensively about it, you know, and he was writing about its connection to a lot of other hormones. And I had always a mild interest in endocrinology. And again, I was just like, man, this guy has the whole package from food to supplements that aren't like extremely dangerous to explaining personality. Like that was a thing I was kind of mildly interested in, like why do people act the way they do? And that caused me to evaluate my own orientation towards lots of different things. Like I was a rat hole. I'll skip this, but like, anyways, am I going off the deep end here? That was
No, it's
the
all good.
naturopaths, and those were just as bad in my experience as normal doctors. So I think you're right. I do consider this like alt, almost fringe weirdo territory, and so that's why I'm always like shocked that anybody even arrives here. And so again, it must speak to your journey as well. Like, did you go through many different dietary modalities to get to kind of the bioenergetic perspective?
Yeah, I think I can tie it up pretty quickly. Basically, I enjoyed fantastic health through my teenage years, and I was learning from my dad about being a personal trainer and doing personal training and getting started with that and falling in love with it. And looking back, I mean, I was healthy because I had a very high functioning metabolism with plenty of muscle mass and all the youth associated hormones, right? And then I basically just fell prey to a bad combination of like personal troubles and psychological stress and environmental degradation. I moved to the city for the first time because I thought that's what I needed to do to, you know, work as a personal trainer. And my health just tanked. And then I thought, of course, that turning to diet would be the fix all, right? So I started with an anti-candida diet, right? That alone is like this big pothole that just sucks so many people who are trying to figure their own health in. So that got me for a while. I then bounced out of that, realized I had caused more problems than I had solved and hadn't really solved any. Then I kind of gravitated towards the carnivore diet when it gained a little bit of news. I'm like, this makes sense. I understand that digestion is important, right? And so the idea of eliminating things that are indigestible, right? And then I feel like there was a bandwagon of people who were kind of defecting from that, or like very early on defecting from that. And this one guy linked something about he tied something together with Jack Cruz and Ray Pete, and Jack Cruz was somebody I'd also listened to in the past. So I'm like, okay, I'll check this Ray Pete guy out. And then, yeah, it was probably 2 summers ago, the moment I wrapped my head around sort of cultivating health by living life as a grounding principle rather than preventing damage, that resonated with me. That spoke to me because it's like, everyone knows that you are healthier after a week of 7 consecutive fulfilling days, right? That feel good, that you eat things that are gratifying and you do things that are gratifying. You feel good. Well, what would happen if you just lived your life in that sort of state? Like, obviously, you think everyone says it makes common sense. Like, that would lead to a better health outcome, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. There's a little bit of a delay. Like that carnivore thing, to watch it like implode was like so satisfying to me, because like I had made like a video in 2018, and like honestly, like going through the comments is just really entertaining, because again, I wonder how many of those people are not carnivore now, because it was fun for me to watch, and I used to type in like carnivore diet on YouTube with like parentheses to see how many videos were made about the subject, and it was like so many every day, you know. And then now if you do it, it's like barely anybody. Like it's really only, I mean, like Sean Baker, and I can't really think of anybody else that's even promoting it. So anyways, those people that are willing to do carnivore, the reason why I made that video is I thought, okay, if they're willing to do carnivore, maybe they're willing to kind of entertain the bioenergetic principle, because carnivore is so fringe that, and this is also kind of an odd idea. And once people experience kind of the metabolism lowering effects of carnivore, those that are like actually in touch with their bodies, like they might transition. And that actually happened, which is crazy.
Right. So the carnivore thing, I also made a video about it, you know, saying like why I'm no longer carnivore, basically. And it's like what it gets right is that it actually removes things that are damaging people in the diet. But it specifically fails on the cultivating energy side of things, right? So a friend was talking to me the other day, and it was sort of like a really casual conversation with an otherwise well-informed person. She was talking about her husband and his diet, and I'm like, well, she's like, well, do you recommend 3 meals a day? I'm like, well, how about this? Like, how about a diet that puts nutrient density, right? Energy density, and also digestibility. Like just those three things to prioritize, you'd be really looking good, like that would really move someone in the right direction.
That's a brilliant way to approach it, I think. And thanks for mentioning that. I don't want anybody listening to think that I think that carnivore is like purely bad. Every video I ever made about it, I tried to list off beneficial things like you just said. Like, I'm sure a lot of problems are caused by or intensified by endotoxin, and if you're eating fat and protein and those are fully digesting and that the fat is having like an antiseptic effect, I'm sure that has a powerful difference in the person's health. So I don't think those, so like you said, the major failing is kind of the detrimental effects to the metabolism in the long term.
So I got to piggyback on the last question I asked, and also just interject. These functional health doctors, right? Like, I am long since over my sort of protest and outrage when I was really young and I discovered how wrong we were about health and science, like back in my teenage years. But I gotta say, man, these functional health docs, like they are actually grinding my gears, right? Because there's a word that describes what they're doing, and it's grifting. Because they're preying upon people who are compromised in their health and their cognition, and they already feel like they've been done a disservice by the mainstream model. And so these are like really sick and traumatized people. And then these functional health docs come in and offer them some, what's weird is I don't see the light that they're painting for their patients at the end of the tunnel. Like, it's not a clear picture of health that they're offering to people. And to get them there, it's like thousands of dollars in fancy lab work and supplements. So I guess my question to you is like, because you have some people who are super, like I was saying, amorphous. They don't draw any lines. They're not happy to have it. They're put off by a conversation about biochemistry, right? Mm-hmm. And mechanisms of action between hormones, right? And how these, basically all the subdivisions. So as a coach, it's like when you're talking to somebody, how, where, and why do you draw the lines that you do, like to make distinctions for people? Because it can be really easy to fall into like an in-depth conversation about biochemistry in the bioenergetic approach, but it's still too reductionist for one client per se.
Can you rephrase that question? I'd like my approach to coaching is probably no, you're not I just want to make sure I know just rephrase it, and like I just want to make sure I know what you're exactly saying.
so it just seems tough because it's like you have people who will come to you and either somewhere on the spectrum between the highly atomized reductionist side or the people who really don't want to think about biochemistry and it gives them a migraine, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. How, where, and why do you draw the lines to say, oh, it's prolactin and it acts through these mechanisms, or not even get into that level of focus, right?
Okay. Good question. That's fantastic. I think it's like different with every single person. Like I talked to somebody maybe 2 days ago that was like all about the mechanisms, and that's not like a normal conversation, but this person like couldn't get enough of like the nitty gritty, and then another person will be like, oh, I saw a video of yours on YouTube yesterday for the first time, and now we're talking, and I have no idea what you're about. And I'm like, why'd you book the appointment? But those conversations are like trying to explain what we were talking about earlier. Like, okay, this idea is about like mimicking the metabolism of a young healthy child, And so going to those types of examples. I don't know how successful I am at like explaining those things to people, but like we talked about earlier, I feel like everybody has their journey, and I'm cognizant of that, and I respect the journey, you know. And so I'll always try to, and again, I don't know how successful I am at this, but I'll try to meet the person at wherever they are, and just try to what's the right word? Uh, whatever their intuition is, I'll try to encourage them to follow that. Like there's some probably hook or something that they got to me or Ray or whoever, and I'll try to validate is what I was looking for. I'll try to validate their intuition, and however a possible and hopefully a non-authoritarian way, try to guide them in different directions. And so say they were saying, oh, the calcium to phosphorus thing was interesting. I'll try to say, okay, like focus on that and see what that does. Or focus on they're coming from carnivore and they don't know about sugar, but they know they have a bunch of symptoms of chronic stress. Okay, try increasing the carbohydrate or whatever. And then if a person gets lab work, it almost becomes way easier, you know, because like you talked about with parathyroid hormone, like if their parathyroid hormone, I don't know, is 30 or 40 or whatever, like, yeah, to eat more calcium and supplement vitamin D, and I'm sure you'll feel way better. You know what I mean? And the other thing is, like, I think I do obtain a large amount of people that have like chronic long-term health problems. And so they have kind of like you and I, like they've run the gamut of different dietary ideas. And so they are kind of sick of that type of top-down approach, you know? And so yeah, long bloated answer to your question. Like I just try to meet people where they are and validate their intuition. And the more and more I do this, I think it's more about just having a conversation with a person and less about I don't know, the technical stuff. But again, that does pop up from time to time, especially when you're analyzing their like lab test. That's when that technical jargon can be useful, because say they're having libido problems and they have a high prolactin level. It's like, okay, yeah, get your prolactin down. You'll probably have a lot better satisfaction with that libido problem.
Right. Yeah. And so I think a lot of people, especially those people who've been suffering for a while, and also something that the functional health docs sort of prey upon, is this idea that we're going to find the root cause, right? And so a lot of those functional docs jump on, oh, it's an underlying Lyme thing, right? And so they'll blow that one way up. And I think that probably why bioenergetics works as well as it does is because it's the tide that lifts all boats, so to speak. So, you know, somebody might have super high parathyroid hormone, and supplementing calcium is going to help that. But how can you say that parathyroid hormone is the root cause? You absolutely can't, because there's this whole other cascade of things that landed the person with expressing high parathyroid hormone, right? And so, like, how do you even begin to approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, no, I think similar to Ray talking about the complexity of everything and painting a broad view of what's going on. You know, like I've talked to several people that have said, like, yeah, I have like childhood trauma and things like that. So, okay, how does that specifically play into the health problem they're experiencing now? And then in an old interview, Ray said, even living in the West was to a degree traumatizing. Like, you know, like if I think back to my like school experience, like I think every time I had like a test, I'd have like a little nervous breakdown. You know what I mean? Like, and that was like throughout all of school, you know? And so I was just like a fragile kid to stress even at a young age. So I don't know how that primed my nervous system to respond to stressors in my 20s and 30s and things. So I think you're right. So again, I would never frame it like, here, we found a 30 parathyroid hormone. If you just get this down, you'll be in good health. I think it's just about like whack-a-mole and trying to get as many things shifted in the right direction as possible. And again, usually it's the person's intuition guiding them over a long period of time of that game of whack-a-mole and trying all these different things and seeing what makes a difference and what doesn't. You know, like for myself, taking a thyroid supplement like that, I must have stopped and started that more than 50 times, you know, and when I would stop, sometimes these things, like I'd start like waking up at 3 or 4 a.m. like every single night when I would stop. But it took me a long time to figure that out, like that it was the thyroid doing that thing. And so again, that was a process. That was a process to go through, and the self-discovery thing took years. You know what I mean? And so again, you're right. It's like I just trying to uh, attain as many self metrics or self knowledge as possible for the individual. I think is the best way to approach any health problem, and that's not easy. It's like the very long road, I think.
Right. And I also think, you brought in the psychological aspect. It's so reductive what we do and how we approach things, like maybe you get a stool sample, they're going to like dig around in there and try and find out which bugs are causing the problem, or you're going to go see a shrink and you're going to sit on a couch for a couple hours a week for a couple months to talk about the shit that really bummed you out 10 years ago. And then you finally you find it, and you wonder why you don't feel great. You've spent hours of your life digging in the dirt of the past, forgetting to live your life, right? And it's like we could be giving ourselves any number of positive inputs day to day, and food is just one way of doing that, of course, but it's one worth exploring.
Yeah, there is I'm sure you've seen it, but a great quote by Ray, and it's like something when the implementation is right of many different things, you can kind of feel the way you want about things. And I, from my limited experience, I feel like that's completely true. Like when my thyroid is low or the stress is high or I feel cold or for a long period of time, I tend to ruminate about dumb stuff that's happened in the past for like literally no reason, and I feel like when things are good, I'm always thinking about the moment and then projecting myself into the future, and the whatever happened in the past is just not that meaningful. So yeah, you're totally right. Those tools available to us, cigarettes, porn, alcohol, going to a psychiatrist and stuff, like none of those things I think are. So all those things have probably anti-stress properties. I think alcohol lowers cortisol to some extent and then has many side effects and things like that. But I don't think any of those are good tools for, like we said earlier, developing a toolbox to kind of make life more enjoyable and easier to help mitigate the daily stress of life.
Yeah, I've oftentimes found myself just in a sort of unexpected or unforeseen moment of bliss, and then I'll immediately tie it back to the fact that, oh yeah, it's the meal I ate and the thyroid I took with that meal. I'm like, it's so therapeutic, and I'm like, wow, if I am deriving this much value from this intervention, it's kind of incredible to think what it could do for people who are in much worse shape than myself.
Speaking of things you can hope for when you're working with somebody, I feel like it's just something like that, feeling euphoria or bliss or something when they implement aspirin or vitamin D or T3 or something, because then you don't have to convince not that you should be trying to convince the person of anything, but it's not on you don't have to convince the person anything. They've already experienced it, and they know how that feels compared to kind of the regular self or the self that had the terrible problem. And that's like a orienting reflex to do more and try more and investigate more. So that's anytime that's happened, I've just been like, oh man, my job is like almost done, because the person will just start accumulating a bunch of self-knowledge about themselves and how they experiment with different things, and they go on the same path that you and I went on, and hopefully that moves them in a favorable direction.
And for any personal trainers who are listening, that moment is always in the testimonial, the private testimonial you receive from your client's spouse or significant other. It's never. So that honestly brings me into the last kind of set of questions here, which is, from one coach to another, I'm curious, like, what psychological range have you kind of dealt with of people who find Ray and come to you, and you're like, where are the outliers? Who sets the range? Like, what really sticks out?
Oh man. That's like impossible question to answer. I've talked to so many
really young people and then really old people.
Oh yeah. No, I think the hair loss stuff resonates with. I've talked to like 18-year-olds and stuff that were losing hair. So
Wow.
I think the baldness keeps getting younger and younger as the environment gets worse and worse and the food gets worse and worse. And then I've talked to people in their 60s plus, and so yeah, it's been a wild ride. It like you really realize how much you don't know when you talk to a huge variety of people, just because the experience is so varied and different, and I know this sounds like trite, but like I feel like I learn as much from talking to everyone as hopefully they do with me, and it gives you perspective of how many different terrible things people can experience in their life, and sometimes like some one of the people I talk about, we talk about like anime, like when we're talking, and then the other one is like about heartache from a girl or something. It's just like it's just having a good conversation most of the time, and it's always unexpected and different every single day. Was that answering your actual question?
Sure. Yeah. Do you think, okay, and then do you think do you notice particular trends in the clients that present to you, like psychologically in particular? Like, who are they?
Yeah, these are really good questions. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like this type of person always, I could say the people that always move in a favorable direction, like at risk of repeating myself, are the people that develop self-knowledge. But I wouldn't say there's like a specific type of person necessarily that I talk to, because that just runs the gamut from people that are like Ray is totally onto something, he's a genius, to people that are like, I just saw a YouTube video yesterday and I don't know anything about this. And so it's really different. But again, I think I obviously, Ray is growing in popularity, so I do talk to a lot of people that are interested in him specifically, but a lot of really skeptical people as well.
What are some of their skepticisms?
The milk is a big one. Antibiotics is a huge one. Sugar is a huge one. I think those are some of them. Using thyroid is like, some people think it's like using cocaine, so like those are some of the big things, I think. But again, there's always something that, like the cold hands and the cold feet, or the wake ups in the middle of the night, or insomnia, or something like that. The things that people maybe inherently know are related to stress, or they can identify things in their life that stressful events that they don't necessarily respond favorably to. So maybe that's it. Maybe people who kind of think that stress might be destroying them, maybe that's a common through line in a lot of people that I talk to. And then if you say, okay, if you acknowledge that like stress is a huge problem and maybe that's causing the disease of civilization, or whatever they call it, then you can go about, if you can identify the problem, then you can go about trying to actually solve it. And so since Ray, his whole kind of worldview involves stress and energy metabolism, and he's really the only one that has that message, that might be a common through line.
Right. Well, to play devil's advocate, I mean, speaking of those people who are, I've actually encountered personally and professionally people who are like really triggered by the idea of supplementing thyroid. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it does seem that vitamin D is at least as potent, a steroid, and that's something that we like. You can literally buy kids vitamin D gummies at any Rite Aid. So, and we think nothing of that, and they'll eat those and megadose those, and they think nothing of it. But maybe it's just still this lasting idea that it's nothing but a vitamin like vitamin C or vitamin A, that it's not. But then taking thyroid is a really triggering, wild thing.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I can tell you my personal experience. Like when I found Ray's stuff and he was kind of talking about, like, nonchalantly, is that the right word, about using thyroid, and it like wasn't a big deal. That was like really comforting to me, because Ray thought it just like wasn't a big deal. And also I had been prescribed thyroid even before I knew who Ray Pete was, but I never knew why I was taking it, or I didn't know if it was doing anything. But again, the coldness intolerance was so bad to me that I was like, there's no possible way you don't have a thyroid problem. You're like freezing all the time. You're freezing in like Southern California. And so again, the most common thing, argument against taking thyroid is people saying that it will lower your own production. But I feel like that's a complete misunderstanding, because that's the therapeutic part of taking thyroid, is lowering your own production. It's like turning down the TSH and the pituitary, which is inflammatory, or activating lipolysis and mobilizing the free fatty acids and blocking the use of glucose and creating the breakdown products of the PUFA, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, taking the thyroid and turning down the activity of the pituitary is like part of the therapy. And so I think maybe they're like confusing testosterone with thyroid, but if you look at like steroid metabolism, I think it's like LDL cholesterol, triiodothyronine or T3, and then vitamin A to like kick off the steroid metabolism of pregnenolone. And so again, I hear that over and over and over again. It must be proliferated on the internet, like everywhere. But again, just simple misunderstanding. And like maybe you said it earlier, like all foods have hormonal effects. It's like, it's just like not solid ground to stand on to say like that taking a hormone or something is dangerous.
Also, that's short-term suppression of thyroid. And I guess disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, this isn't medical advice, but in my understanding, right, you're exactly right, short-term and long-term. It seems that taking thyroid, if you have any healthy thyroid tissue left, the supplemental thyroid will give that tissue a break. And when you stop taking the supplemental thyroid, that tissue will have had a chance to regenerate. And if you have none, well, then the supplemental thyroid is filling in for the thyroid that you have totally destroyed, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think the other thing that maybe the person making that claim is not grasping is that it's like an uphill battle. This is just my point of view, my 2 cents, but like our environment is so terrible, like that thyroid and good nutrition and vitamin D are some like the most basic things you can do to defend yourself against the environment. So a lot of times somebody will say like, oh, you eat so pro-metabolic or something, why do you still need to take thyroid? It's like the environment isn't getting better, it's getting worse. And so if we lived in a place like an environment that actually supported our biology and made us more resistant to stress and things, like, yeah, you might be able to stop taking thyroid at a certain point. And I'm sure many people might be able to do that, but yeah, again, and the last thing is that I think cultures for long periods of time, like I don't make the Paleolithic or we should do what our ancestors did argument, but if you want to look at it like that from that perspective, I think who's to say that thyroid is not part of our normal human diet? So I don't know. A lot of people. That thyroid thing is a controversial thing, but I don't know why. I think a person would just have to dig into Rhoda Barnes's books to find out that it was unwarranted.
Also, speaking to the environment, and this is kind of just airing a thought I had about it, which is like that if the effects of non-ionizing radiation, the EMFs for communications, have this destructuring effect on the cell water, right, on the water inside the cell, that would have a consequential degradation of cellular stability and energy production. It would also be accompanied by an increase in prolactin, which would cause a lot of mirroring symptoms of hypothyroidism. And maybe it's a Band-Aid, but seeing as we're up against this sort of novel environmental toxin in the form of EMF, this pollutant, then maybe thyroid is the best available mediator of that particular stress, specifically the EMF through that mechanism. I don't know.
I think you're right. I think anything that would lower the parathyroid hormone, or support calcium metabolism would have that effect. And I think there's actually a paper, I think I collected it in my notes, but I haven't gone through the whole thing, that researched Wi-Fi and vitamin D. And so I think that has actually been studied. But yeah, my limited understanding of this is that Wi-Fi and RF radiation causes the efflux of calcium into the cell. And so I think increasing the thyroid and the subsequent carbon dioxide that's like dragging the calcium out of the cell, and supplying a generous amount of dietary calcium and then vitamin D and probably vitamin K too, I think that protects against the overflow of calcium into the cell. And so, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right. That totally goes right into the next one, which is basically, you mentioned earlier, it's like Ray gives us an image, and I think you kind of implicitly signed off on it as well, of what is health. Well, health is the young person who is voraciously consuming new information, food, experiences, is generally agreeable, right? Do you want to speak to just maybe some of the ways that you encounter in your clients, like how people don't grasp the extent to which modern life and our environment and society is pulling us away from that?
Oh man, yeah, like I feel like my own experience is that. So again, this will sound kind of cheesy, but as you get healthier, or you increase the real biological energy, like Ray has a quote that I put on my Twitter, and he says, like, when you start eating real food, and increasing the energy metabolism, you can start learning who is doing what to you. And I'd say that's like a big exploration, because I think a lot of people like start asking questions of what the hell is going on here, because they have real more biological energy to ask those questions and to be curious, and to jettison ideas that they held very personally for a long time. So again, you could just go through my work, and there were periods where I would jettison, like I used to like identify as a libertarian and like completely jettison that like 2016 on air when I was talking with Ray. And so again, I don't think I'm answering your question, but yeah, that questioning, asking what's going on, I would say in my limited experience, is something that people generally do go through when they're kind of going through all of this stuff. And I'm still going through it, like learning about different aspects of what the hell is happening right now, and I'm still blurry and unclear of what is even going on and what has happened in the past as well.
Yes, I think that's...
What about you?
Well,
what about your experience?
I think that, honestly, I was dealt a lucky one in that my folks decided to homeschool me, right? So I didn't even make it into school until 10th grade. And
nice.
I just remember being aghast by two things in particular. The first being that you could kind of get through academically without really doing much of anything, and that like the effort that got you maybe a B or a C was really no effort at all. And then the other thing, right, and the other thing, the big one, was the random acts of meanness, right? I was just appalled at how awful kids were to one another. And that had such a lasting traumatic effect on me that I have put in and continue to put in time just unwinding. But I think that's a big one for a lot of people, the idea that school is traumatic. And of course that it doesn't teach you how to think, but what to think, and that we ought to be wary of that. So I feel like I'm, lucky for having dodged that. EMF is a huge one, because the moment you start talking about it, it's you dive into woo, and it's like, yo, you can't see you can't see nuclear radiation, but we all acknowledge the problem. We can't see, feel, smell EMF, but all evidence points to the fact that it probably is a probable carcinogen.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Bioenergetic report? that I think I forgot what year it came out, but it's like a huge study of the effects of EMF. Like, I mean, a lot of when I would mention things in EMF in San Francisco, people would look at you like you're extremely dumb. But when I bought like a Acousticom 2, which is like a mid-tier RF meter, and when I lived in my other place in Mexico, it was a little bit further away from everything on like a street, and like a big street away from the center. And I was shocked when I turned it on how high it was. It was like, I forgot the units, but it was like the very high units on the machine, the unit. And when there was like a huge field that I would go walk to go get milk. So I walked through this field like all the time, and I brought the meter one time, and I was shocked on how high the level was when nothing was around me. There's no homes, no Wi-Fi or whatever. And the meter was still like raging on how high it was. And you could tell from the cell phone towers in the distance of how saturated the field was from how they were so far away. And I was like, yeah, this, again, the PUFA, the culture in and of itself of how stressful and fear driven it is. So many so many different things could amplify a person's response to stress and age them quicker. But EMF is one of those things that just has proliferated fairly recently. You know, I think the first iPhone came out in 2007. And so that's like, how many, 14 years? Like that's not a long time to be in this experiment of what happens with every single person has a LTE phone on them and now has a 5G phone on them. It's horrible to think of what specifically it will do.
Right. Yeah, it opens up a whole big can of worms. So, you know, we were talking about before I hit record, this idea of not knowing what to do in uncertain times, right? And I think that's something that a sentiment many can resonate with. What do you think, how would you maybe speak to the importance and the boundaries of investing in one's health as a hedge against the future, or as a matter of protest, right?
Yeah, another excellent question. Yeah, I mean, that's why we do all of this, you know. It's like a selfish thing in that you want to feel so much better, but then at a certain point you just want to talk about it with other people and share the message. That's again, if a person was paralyzed with what to do about the future, they thought something like the future would get worse, that would obviously be a basic place to start of trying to fortify your health and increase functioning so you could tackle the future, whatever happens, you know? So I think that's very smart.
Right. It seems like the sort of necessary intervention to counteract acquired authoritarianism, because no children are born authoritarian. And yet somewhere in life we acquire this like trauma that I think we see play out in different people to differing in different ways. Some people turn it inward quite intensely, and I think that's a lot of maybe the people that come to you, you know, because they are at least acknowledging that they have a problem and maybe they did something wrong. And sadly, we have a society which basically exonerates and upholds the people who externalize that authoritarianism, where those, at least in my experience, those people oftentimes have something that they are not willing to look at in themselves. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I knew people that should we get into this? I don't want to get your podcast censored. No, I think the culture, like people have things they deeply resent about themselves, and then they adopt in the culture to mask these things that they don't like about themselves. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like being incongruent, or using cultural things as a mask for pain or resentment or things like that? Is that what you're saying?
That's also true. No, I was saying more that I was saying more that people, it's like to put it in simple terms, you know, a teenager, right? One of which they're both under this authoritarian stress to conform, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of which becomes bulimic, right? And so they internalize
Mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm,
And the other one becomes
mm-hmm,
bully.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see that dichotomy, the internalization versus the externalization?
A little bit, yeah.
And then those,
These are very smart questions.
and then those bullies grow up to become people of import in our society.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Like everybody deals with stress or the culture in like a different way. That's what you're saying, right?
yeah.
there's a quote from Bucky Fuller, and he says, like, I think we're all born geniuses, and then the process of living, like being in the culture, de-geniuses us, or something like that. So I think you're totally right. Like, and I think Abraham Maslow said that the culture is supposed to have an anti-stress effect. Like, it's supposed to dampen the stress response. And then what does our culture do? It intensifies it to unknown levels. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
yeah. And then again, the last year being the most, I mean, probably the most stressful years of everybody's life. And then there's no end in sight. And so, um, so yeah, again, I think that concept of stress, kind of Hans Selye's version of stress, I think that resonates with a lot of people. And I think the more people that again, it's easy to strike down Ray's caricature online of milk, sugar, and orange juice and Coke and things like that. But few people are like meticulously deconstructing the metabolic energy and stress idea. You know, like that's never really countered. It's just people love slam dunking on Ray's dietary advice. You know what I mean? And that's there's like a huge foundation that gets you to that dietary advice, whatever that is, and that's completely ignored. You know, and so that's again, and so it just offers room for clarity, and that's what you and I are doing right now.
Right. Again, to bring it back to what I started with, like all of those people who say that sugar is bad are operating under this implicit, none of them even know about rate of living theory, but they all live by it and they don't realize it.
Yeah.
So it's pretty tough. Also, another thing that's just always like really rung true with me with Ray is this idea of the cell, and then the organism is sort of just like this aggregate average of what all of your cells happen to be doing. And then looking at the earth, of course, as a larger organism. And, you know, it's like if one cell in your liver isn't doing too hot, it's fine. It's got plenty of others to buffer that stress, right? And so he has that quote most recently about how people's friends ought to buffer emotional stress, you know. And of course, that's being torn from us at every level, you know, these days. So something like this Zoom call is very much like, you know, one cell reaching out to another, like, how are you actually functioning? You know, you're functioning well. You're congruent with all the other evidence to support that Danny Roddy is doing well, you know, and that offers such incredible value, you know, in keeping me sane. And I know you've expressed the same sentiment in other shows, and I'm like, yeah, of course, that's exactly the point of this.
Yeah, man, that's so obvious that it's like, I mean, anybody that gets into science, like the 6 feet thing is so bizarre and draconian, you know. The mass thing is equally as stupid, but it's crazy that people entertain it as scientific, you know. Like the six, again, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, you know. And again, the fact that these like educated people that consider themselves kind of the brains of the nation that stick to these bizarre rules for themselves and their children. Again, it's a tragedy. I know it's not necessarily their fault. They've been poisoned, you know, through the food system and the culture and things like all of us have. But it's just it's a bad situation. It's hard to deal with.
It was the emergence of the scientismists, and the true believers, for sure.
Yeah, and that has been brewing for a long time, you know. Even, again, not to get your podcast canceled or whatever, like, but just like they're doing all this Mars stuff right now, like, and that to show kind of the high priest of scientism how amazing we are. We're like going into Mars right now. Like, couldn't we spend that money on like more important things right now? Like, how come that's happening at the same time of all this coronavirus stuff? And so I think the effort to indoctrinate the public that science is the most advanced thing imaginable, I think that's on purpose. And again, people have been talking about technocracy for a long, long time. I think Patrick Wood has a book called Long Hard Road to the Technocracy, or Long Road to Technocracy, where again, he's been talking, I think it's been happening since like the 50s. And so I think what we're living through amazingly is like a 70-year culmination of many different agendas over a long period of time. So it's actually kind of incredible, but also terrifying.
Definitely terrifying. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, and I feel like in a big way, you know, one of my friends put it to me. He was one of the first people I knew to first be really drawn in by transhumanism, and then to see it for what it was. And he was like, he presented this to me in evidence for simulation theory. He's like, don't you think it's something that we just happen to be born in the generation with the internet? Like, how incredible is that? He's like, I'm not buying it, right? Something's fishy. And I think that maybe it's this is what's fishy about it, you know, is that the internet is going to be expanded into basically what will be the digital collective human consciousness. And that's something we're not really ready for, in my opinion.
Yes, people can talk about the transhumanist stuff way more intelligently I can, but I know that's been a long, like, you might even argue that's the reason for kind of blurring the gender lines and saying that there's a paper called Changing Images of Man, and it's kind of like a white paper about how to destroy like the basic concepts of who we are. And so again, it's clearly part of the whole agenda to say there's nothing special about being alive or human. So that's I empathize with a lot of people that are religious, because that fits right into their paradigm. And so yeah, it's really weird and disgusting.
Danny, it's coming on time here. I want to be respectful of your following engagements here with very important business. Any closing words of hope you would leave with the people?
Yeah, no, I keep ending on dark notes. Yeah, you know,
we
like,
should invest in our own health. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's the only thing you can do. You got to do that. Do you want to feel bad all the time? You know, I think again, going back to the start, developing that toolbox can make life easier, more enjoyable, and it can mitigate and eliminate aspects of stress in the past that are haunting a person. And so I think it's just and again, if you engage with Ray's work, I think you'll become a better version of yourself over time. I'm not saying I'm some amazing specimen or anything, but again, I thank Ray for I don't know, just being a better, like, I couldn't even talk to you or do a live stream or anything like 10 years ago. That would have given me a panic attack or anxiety or something. So again, I just strongly believe that mitigating stress will make life more sweet and just more enjoyable in general.
True words. All right. Danny, Roddy, a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone go find Danny at Danny Roddy Patreon.
T.me/Danny Roddy is the Telegram, and that's probably for the moment, the best place to find me.
Absolutely. All right, man. Take care.
Thanks, Liam.